Hello viewer! If you were wondering about the title of this video, it's of course going to be about the recent launch of the crewed Space Dragon rocket, which managed to interface with the International Space Station. Poyekhali, however, is a Russian word for let's go, and these were the words uttered by Yuri Gagarin when he launched into space on the Vokot 1 and made him the first human into space. And he would tragically die later in an aviation accident, but that's beyond the point of this video. What I'm going to talk about here is about cultural things, the cultural influence of the space race and the idea of human progress. I'm going to talk a little about Tesla, and I'm going to talk about space colonization and terraforming. So firstly, the space race was sort of the peak of human achievement, and it kind of still is. I mean, we've improved technology in ways like efficiency is better, our logistical chains are better, our computers are better, but this is all what we call in Dutch gerommel in de marge. It's the neoliberal idea of technological improvement. We're just improving what we already have, making it more efficient, but we're not really developing anything new. And that's the thing with, for example, this new Space Dragon rocket from SpaceX, Elon Musk's company. And I like Elon Musk in some ways. I mean, he's an Afrikaner, so, you know, my people, so gotta you know, at least he's got a point there for me, you know. But sleep you for. His company, the Dragon that he developed, and the Falcon, the SpaceX Corporation is developing rockets for NASA now. But they're not really technological improvements, they're cost-saving measures. So the reason for the SpaceX program was to save costs on the existing Soyuz rockets. Soyuz rockets have been, since the retirement of the space shuttle in 2011, the only way to connect to the ISS and it's the only spacecraft basically we have available. And they cost about $240 million per launch. And the Dragon would cost, or the SpaceX rockets, the manned SpaceX rockets would cost $100 million. So it's a cost-saving measure. It's again a neoliberal thing. I do admire Musk's vision. You know, he wants to colonize Mars. He wants to improve human technology. His business practices not so much, because he has never really created much value. Which in the case of SpaceX, I don't mind so much, because, you know, as an economy we produce surplus value, and if we're going to invest that surplus value into anything, why not invest that value into actual human progress? And I don't mean it in the leftist way of progress, where social values are progress. No, I mean actual technological progress. But unfortunately, the SpaceX isn't really that much of a technological improvement. It's not as advanced as the space shuttle. It has less capabilities. The space shuttle was capable of re-entry, of course, but it had also the capability of launching spacewalks, and had a grappling arm. It had a lot more capabilities than these new SpaceX rockets. So the SpaceX rockets are mostly just cheaper than using Soyuz. Also geostrategical, of course. The fact that Russia, despite all the embargoes launched on it and all the geopolitical tensions, has continued to allow the use of Baikonur Cosmodrome and the Soyuz rocket program by the European and American space programs shows goodwill by the Russians, in my opinion. Because if they had cut off the Soyuz program, there would basically be a bunch of ISS astronauts stranded in space with no way to get them back. And we have a serious setback in the development of space research, because you do a lot of technological research we can't do on Earth on the ISS in zero gravity conditions and so on. And doing research on meteorium, all sorts of things. If you are interested in that, you should do some reading on it yourself. But the point is, it's not a technological improvement, it's just a cost-saving measure. And, you know, Musk has never produced extra value, especially with Tesla, because electrical cars are simply not a viable alternative to regular cars. I've said this many times, but the costs to improve the electrical grid and to replace old cars is just, it's not creative destruction as it should be, destroying all the technology with better new one. It's simply value destruction, because it's wealth destruction, because it doesn't add much value and it costs more than it adds public transportation, and less cars are better alternatives. But I've talked about this in the past. At any rate, Musk makes his money from subsidies. For Tesla, he receives environmental subsidies. For SpaceX, he receives defense subsidies from the US Department of Defense, because they probably well, it's a pretty logical, but they don't want to be dependent on Russia for their space operations, especially since they're considering launching new satellite program for improved communications and these sort of things, and they don't want to have to do that from Russia. Anyway, there's the the technological development is actually still pretty stagnant. Aside from some communications improvement, better computing, there's not really improvement, and it's not very visionary. Now, Musk is very visionary, but he's also limited to what he can actually do. He's an eccentric and a bit of a lunatic, and he launches unrealistic and unrealizable proposals all the time, and he talks nonsense frequently. But at least he's a man with a vision. And what I find interesting about Musk, and also about Richard Branson, who is the man who launched the first commercial space flight company with Virgin Galactic, which flies just above the Earth's orbit and can, sort of like the Concorde, very fast flight just on the edge of space. That these are billionaires in improving human technological knowledge and basically progressing humanity, which is of course the European strategy. If you look at an IQ bell curve, a European IQ bell curve, white people, has more geniuses and more stupid people. So the strategy is basically we have a few very high IQ people who are generally quite intolerable in life, but who are so intelligent they progress humanity through their discoveries. Newton, for example, was such a person. Leibniz, you can name these great inventors who developed humanity. But it's also, for example, businessmen. Musk and Branson are themselves not engineers or mathematicians or anything in the way of scientists, but they are risk-taking businessmen. And the 19th century Industrial Revolution was basically run by risk-taking businessmen. Human progress in the 19th century was made because these people invested and took risks. For example, the guys who first developed the oil technology by taking a risk in buying land and building towers in Texas. I forget what they're called. It's not Rockefellers, it's the other one with the R. Anyway, Edison, for example. Edison, who himself was an inventor, but also patented a lot of other inventions. He improved human knowledge a lot. Of course, Edison, the original fans of Tesla, Nikola Tesla, are not going to be very happy that I'm praising Edison, because Edison did screw over Tesla, but that's a discussion for another time, something you can look up if you're interested. But at any rate, it's an interesting thing that we're sort of reverting back to that 19th century way of technological progress, while during the most of the 20th century, we have... the 21st? Yeah, the 20th century. We've been developing through state programs. I mean, in the beginning I talked about Yuri Gagarin a little bit. Communism, of course, the Soviet Union was a pioneer in the space race. First satellite, first man in space, first orbital station, and so on. Yes, the Americans launched a man on the moon, but otherwise they didn't contribute very much to the space race. The original modules of the ISS are Russian modules, for example. Orbital station technology is more advanced in Russia, and rocket technology has been for a while as well, until the space shuttle, but the space shuttle is retired. So the best rocket technology in the world for ballistic missiles, for space rockets and so on, this is all in Russia. They've got the best air defense systems, the best nuclear missiles, and so on. They've put a lot of technological investment in that. And NASA was, of course, a government program as well, but that's sort of been shifting away towards more of these individual billionaires investing knowledge into human progress, investing their capital, which I find interesting because it's sort of the historical norm for Europeans, and is only possible, of course, when you've got a huge wealth inequality, actually, which I am not in favor of. Well, it depends on how the wealth inequality is sort of created, and if with the money they get is actually earned and invested well, because surplus value reinvested is actually valuable to humanity as a whole, because it creates for example, new technology, knowledge about space. But as a leftist would say, for example, with the surplus value of billionaires, should invest in, for example, hospitals, and the space race is a waste of money. Well, maybe, but you can do both. And is it the business of billionaires to invest in hospitals. I don't know. Anyway, the cultural impact of the space race as well, like I said, it was sort of the peak of human achievement. Still is, really, and it was culturally very, very influential. Star Wars, of course, inspired by the space race in many ways. Star Trek. I've never watched an episode of Star Trek. I know about it through cultural osmosis. And it was sort of the optimistic, really positive view of the future. We're going to colonize the stars. We're going to bring enlightenment and freedom and equality and so on. And the equality and freedom and enlightenment are dirty words for many people these days. For myself as well, I have a very negative reaction whenever I hear someone talk about freedom, because it's usually used in a very politicized context. But the general idea of enlightenment, if you look at it objectively, is not a bad thing. To have people know more and understand more is a good thing, generally speaking. That's the thing, you can be nostalgic about wanting to go back and live on a farm, and maybe that would be better for the general happiness of most people around 100 IQ. And because we've evolved to basically live on a farm with a small family and a small tribe, and have a fairly easy day-to-day, live with the seasons. For human psychology mostly, that would probably be best. And I think that's why I approve of an idea like Archeofuturism, where we basically have a big independent middle class sort of living that sort of lifestyle with more technology, and we have a technocratic elite who's busy with the surplus value that these middle class people create and these workers create, investing that into the space race so we can settle more farms on Mars, for example. That's sort of how I view a positive idea of the future, where we have a sort of aristocratic, technocratic class based on knowledge, who kind of leave most of the population alone to their own devices to have organic rule, and they're just busy with big mega projects that improve humanity's knowledge and standards in general, rather than the technocratic exploitative neoliberal elite we have today, who have this huge sense of need of control and espionage on everybody, and control everyone through financial systems and media and so on. That's the Orwellian sort of cyberpunk view of the future, where we're going to have huge mega corporations rule over us, with political democracy and media sort of being shams, with the media basically being owned by financial interests manipulating a message in their favor, and democracy basically just being an illusion, where you're given the idea that you have any sort of say, but in reality democratic power is nil, which is sort of where we are now, and that's as it is only going to keep getting worse and worse. But anyway, space race had a huge cultural impact through Star Wars, through Star Trek, and all these other sort of things. And this was when we had a sort of positive ideal, that this has sort of somewhat replaced the ideals we had of either God or communism, because at least these things had ideals. To serve God and to serve a good and moral life is an ideal. To even Marxism has an ideal, at least, of to elevate humanity out of poverty and to bring scientific enlightenment. It's one of those things they used to say, to cut away mysticism and obscurantism and look at real science. Now there's problems with that, because societally that doesn't work very well. But on the other hand, for genuinely intelligent people, holding on to mysticism just because society wants is also not very good for the improvement of humanity generally. So, but at least they had ideals, and we don't have ideals in this modern neoliberal society. What we're doing is improving efficiency, like I said. It's just laissez-faire is the motto of the modern world, where we don't have a purpose we're striving towards. We don't have, as a society, any idea why we're doing anything. We're just kind of here and we're living, and that's all there is to it. And I find that a very disheartening sort of thing. And that's like I like people like Musk and Branson, because at least they have something of a vision, even though especially with Branson I disagree, and Musk is often just a bit of a lunatic. But at least they have a vision, and you can't say that about most politicians or most prominent figures in society today. They're not visionaries in any way, and I want a more Faustian spirit. I want to discover what is behind every hill. I want to discover what is on every planet. I want to be able to terraform Mars, which is absolutely possible. Yes, Mars has some issues. It's a multi-century project to terraform Mars. and to have the political will and the willpower to continue that project for centuries is very hard, probably impossible to achieve. But it's not impossible. You could set that in motion by just, well, what are the problems Mars has? Well, it has weaker gravity, it has lower magnetic shielding. So you lob a whole bunch of asteroids filled with iron at it. Then you have to do some things to adjust the atmosphere so liquid water can exist, and lob some more asteroids filled with water at it. This is a process to transform the whole core of the planet, and it'll take a couple centuries at least for that to settle and so on. But it's certainly not impossible. Mars is a very good candidate for terraforming, and why shouldn't we? I mean, all species want to expand their territory, to expand their biomass maximally. That's what DNA codes for, you know, conquest and reproduction. And so intelligence, you know, consciousness allows us to colonize other planets in principle. So following our biological imperative, why shouldn't we try and conquer other planets? And I have a lot of people reacting negatively to this in the nationalist spheres, because they think, it's a waste of time, we need to look at our own peoples first and so on. And yeah, I agree, we need to protect our own people and our own culture and values and so on first, but that's a question of willpower that could be settled tomorrow. No one can challenge us militarily. The United States is still the absolute military hegemon, and if they adjusted their system of values, that'd be pretty much sorted. Even though I would prefer the Americans not to continue to be the sole world hegemon, I'd prefer to have a more multipolar world. But it's not like we are defeated militarily or defeated by the strength of the fist. We're just defeated in the mind. It's our own spirit of our own people that's defeated, and that's not a question of weapons or money or anything. That's just culture, and that is a project that will be settled within a century one way or another, whether we all die or we regain our sense of self, or if we eradicate ourselves through AI. One way or another, within a century this will be settled. And what then? Well, if we are eradicated through replacement, then, well, you can probably say that the space race is over and humanity will die on this Earth. If we're replaced by AI, probably AI will do what we didn't. And if we win, we win. So, yeah, sure, that's a primary concern, but you have to look at things long-term as well. And I think a long-term vision for humanity, as such as it is now, to give it a purpose beyond the ideas of God and communism, is to strive towards the conquest of space, to have this Faustian ideal, to make ourselves the best we can, biologically, in terms of knowledge. That's sort of my ideals for this. That's what I would like to see. And we're not really doing that. As such as it is, course going as it is, I know most nationalists are right about that. We're going towards a very dystopian future with completely mixed populations who have no roots, who have no way to unite against elite interests. And these elite interests are very base, basically just money and pleasure and hedonism. And I mean, I'd still not really approve of it, but I'd be a lot happier if the elites had at least some vision or purpose beyond all their greed and pillaging. But they don't really seem to. They seem to just be working towards an agenda where they have more power. It's not a very noble goal. And anyway, that's why I think the space race is important. And I approve of a lot of programs like ISS, the European Space Program. Also because astronauts, interestingly, astronauts are almost all either Asiatic or European. They're from the European Union, North America, Japan. I think Chinese has been on the ISS. But these are all pinnacles of humanity, these people. They usually have PhDs, they're engineers, mathematicians, people with a really educated background who are physically peak performing people. Usually they're military. They really are the pinnacle of humanity, and to have these people, investing in these people and give them the resources to elevate us all, I think is a good idea. It's a good project, and it's also a project where a lot of other people, the pillagers who we see in these American cities now, for example, these lootings and so on, these people complaining about social justice and whatnot, are never going to contribute to any of that. They're never going to help us elevate humanity. They're always going to just be unproductive and taking surplus value away towards destruction, not towards investing in something better. Tucker Carlson had this take, which is of course a race blind take, but he's not wrong, that this is society is the pillaging of the middle classes and the workers by the underclasses, but he neglected to mention the elites, although I think he would agree. These people have no investment in society. They just parasite off of it. And what use do we have for parasites? We're never going to achieve anything if we let these people run rampant and have them dominate our social and cultural values. It's never going to be a better society in that way. So sure, we need to take care of that first, as many nationalists say, but that doesn't preclude the idea of the space race and of conquering the galaxy, in my opinion. It's just a longer term project. Sure, you need to take, issues come as they appear, but you need to have long-term goals.
I am a weapon in the eternal crusade to forge humanity's mastership of the stars.
And every action I take, no matter how violent or how cruel, is for the greater good of my people.